Hello, welcome to this episode of Bell Midnight. On this episode, we'll be talking about true terrifying tales of cave diving. I'm your host, Joseph Michaels, joined by John Mack. So what do you got for us?
Actually, this particular subject is something that's I always found interesting because of the way humans react to potentially dangerous situations and the human need to explore. It's been fascinating because humans have a tendency to explore these unknown places, and it's kind of, I believe, one of our evolutionary traits. We seek more knowledge about these places. If there's something that's unknown, people will risk life and limb to go into those places. And even if it's something mundane, like mapping the dimensions of a particular area that it was previously unexplored, people will line up to do it. You can't keep them away. It doesn't matter what the risk is.
Natural born explorers.
Exactly. It's quite frankly part of the reason for our success. Biologically, we experience a physical feedback from our discoveries. We have chemicals that are released in the brain. It's similar to when you do other things, you get a dopamine rush. Essentially, your brain is, in a way, in conjunction with how we've developed as a species, is manipulating it, but not manipulating so much as compelling you to gain more information, to explore the unexplored. Those chemicals that are released in our brain, they provide this encouragement. When we do these things, when we skydive somewhere, of course, we get an adrenaline. People get adrenaline rushes. There's dopamine rushes for other activities. It's a very effective means of pushing a species forward in their evolution. If you were to take away the physical feedback, the chemicals our brain kind of uses to govern us, it would take away a cornerstone of our evolution. Just think specifically about how the tools that we use on a day-to-day basis would have changed if there was no compelling urge to go into the unknown or find scientific data. In the process of doing what we do, we discover new animals, we discover new plants, we fashion new tools, and they also serve to quench this thirst for knowledge.
Kind of like to scratch that instinctual itch.
Exactly. I've always had an interest in caves. It's kind of a weird thing. I think most people do. I don't know if it's a particular personality type. I don't have any psychological data on it, but I'm sure you've been somewhere. Like I know you've spent some time hiking in the woods and things like that. And you've seen, if you ever see a cave or a hole in the ground, like the fascination just starts and you have to fight the urge to go throw yourself in there.
Oh, exactly.
Like, I want to get in there. You want to find somewhere that's unexplored. It's deep, it's dark, it may be cold, inhospitable, not an ideal place for a human being. And you just want to thrust yourself in there and shake a stick around and see what falls out or what scurries about down there. It's fascinating.
Yeah, it's time to suit up, boys. We're going in.
Yeah, exactly. It's compelling. So if there is a deep, dark place on this planet, you can bet that a human being has tried to explore it. Probably endangering their own lives, probably with not enough equipment, but there's that compelling force to get in there. There were two cases in particular when I was looking through caves, involved tragedy, and they really kind of stood out to me above the others. They're very famous cases. One is more recent, the other is quite old. So there's two cases that really stand out to me. They're both famous. One is older, and one is, of course, more recent. You're looking at caving and you're looking at people putting themselves in dangerous situations. What's the most dangerous form of caving? And surely you know.
Oh, it's diving, isn't it?
Yeah, it's easily diving. Because once you get down there, not only do you have all the problematic issues of being in a cave in that unknown territory, but you also have the problem of being in the water, dealing with decompression, things of that nature.
Yeah, and plus another problem with being in the water in a cave is you kick up silt and you're essentially blind.
Exactly. And that actually plays into this later on. There's some blindness that comes in, and it's not during the initial phase. It's actually not mentioned as there being a silt problem. It's more when people went in after. The first case I wanted to look at, it's a famous case about Mossdale Cavern. Mossdale Cavern is a cave system in the Yorkshire Dales, England. It's about 5 kilometers, that's 3.1 miles, north of Grassington, and it's east of, I believe it's pronounced Coniston, And that's where the Mossdale Beck sits, at the base of what's called the Mossdale Scar. It's about an altitude of 1,394 feet on the eastern flank of Wharfendale and extends southeast beneath the Grassington Moor. The cave is pretty extensive. The cave system is formed in within the middle limestone of the Yoredale series. There's a large stream that flows through there. I even pulled up. I was curious as just how much the average flow in there. It's about 100 liters a second, which is, it's not a huge amount. And has been shown they've dipped dye into the cave and they've tested where it resurges. And it's at a place called Black Keld. And it's about 4.4 kilometers, 2.7 miles to the west-northwest. And it was about 738 feet lower in altitude. This place has basically captivated people because there are large parts of it where there should be a place where caverns link up, and no one's really gotten that far. So on the 24th of June, 1967, there were 10 people who entered the cave. And to put it mildly, bad stuff happened. The cave is known to be extremely dangerous in an already extremely dangerous field. The stream that flows through the cave system is about 3 miles, and it comes out that distance away, of course. It's not the first time it happened. Now, the first time people have gone in there was made in 1941 from the British God, I can't even say that word. British Association. They penetrated the cave through what has been come to be known as the lavatory basin, or old entrance. For some years after the exploration was carried out, under the leadership of R.D. Leakey, what an ironic name, and the cave was roughly surveyed to the limits of what's known as the Marathon and Knee Wrecker branches of the system. With a name like Knee Wrecker, you can see where this is going to go.
I love that name, Knee Wrecker.
Yeah, exactly. It's fantastic. It's almost like he should be running Bartertown. In 1947, the account of the work was published in Cave Science, specifically Volume 1, page 7, with the provisional survey plan of the cave. The discovery process they took was limited, and it was extremely dangerous due to the stream that flows through that I mentioned before. Low water level is an absolute must. You have to get there when it hasn't been raining, or is not raining and hasn't rained for a while. The cave quickly floods during rainfall, like rapidly floods. And the cave itself, once you get inside, is very intricate. It takes an extreme amount of manpower to explore it. Now, most of the cave was explored and surveyed. The only parts that remained unexplored were deeper into the cave. Now, people were looking for a loop that was expected in that sort of cave system. That far had not been explored by the surveyors. There were particular passages that had intense drought in them, and there was a terminal choke point. It's called the Stream End Cavern. They wanted to know what was causing the drought in the rest of the cave and what was beyond the choke point in the Stream End Cavern. Humans being what humans are, once the surveying is done, they go, well, it's unacceptable. I have to know. I can't not know. So what do people do? They throw themselves in the cave. In previous expeditions, the place was so dangerous because of the stream that a telephone wire had to be connected. And it was a long line, and it ran down. And it was difficult to maintain because of the nature of the cave, because of the water. But there would be somebody topside who could give a moment's notice warning that we've got rain. You need to get out. Or the moors are starting to get a little bit higher. You need to get out. Like any kind of, precipitation or any kind of impact of water, and everybody's out. You can't be in there. So the 10 people who entered the cave in 1967 didn't have the telephone system. It was in disrepair because it had happened so long ago. They didn't have the benefit of that. They did have people who were watching they had a hut up there, and there was someone who was keeping their eye on the weather. But you have to also remember, considering the length and depth of the cave, there was no way for that person. Yeah, they could see rain, but there's no quick way for them to get to you.
How did they get yeah, exactly. That's the problem. How are they going to get the message down to them in time?
Well, that's precisely it. Now, the person who's up there can do a brief dive to get to one of the early caverns. But beyond that, I mean, you've got guys down there that they're hours in. Like, how are you going to get there? It almost largely proves that having a lookout of sorts was entirely useless. But whatever. On the day, the moors were dry and the stream in the cavern was low. It wasn't even an average capacity, essentially. It was much lower than normal.
All right, extremely low.
Extremely low. It was ideal conditions to explore. The only hitch that there was a possibility of thundery showers in the forecast.
Great.
Now, to you and me, that kind of seems like a bad risk to take. But we have to remember where this is. It's in the UK, so rain is probably nonstop. So the party was split. There were 6 men that were going in the front with the intention of exploring the deeper sections. Their names were Dave Anderson, Jeff Burrow, Bill Franks, John Ogden, Mike O'Brien, and Colin Vickers. They were all experienced. I have a list of their accreditations here, their experience and everything. I'm not going to go through it. There's so many abbreviations here that I can't stomach it, neither will you. Needless to say, they were professionals. And from what I'm reading, they were extremely, extremely well equipped. The other 4 cavers, which I haven't mentioned, of the 10, were doing a very brief dive. They were going to take some pictures of the first cavern, and then they were going to come out. The 6 went in, the 4 went in, and then the 4 did what they needed to do and came back out. They returned to the base it's called the Hal Gill Nick Shooting Hut. That's the hut I was talking about, where they changed, made a meal, and they had no cause for anxiety. There was no weather. 3 of the party, being as uneventful as it was, left for Ingleton. And they left somebody named Morag. It was a woman that was with her. Her last name was Morag. At the hut. She was one of the 4 that was doing the very shallow dive. There was some rain that started, and it continued to fall lightly. And at about 1930 hours, Morag returned to the scar, where the cave entrance is, and finding little apparent difference in the water conditions, there was no impact whatsoever. She just went back to the hut. Shortly after, the sky opened up, and Mother Nature said, nah, I'm gonna piss all over this expedition.
Wow.
And so Morag starts worrying, and she went to the scar again, and she got there at about 2100 hours. At this point, the Mossdale Beck had formed a lake in front of the scar. The entrance to the cave was completely submerged. So she goes and calls for help, and it reaches the Upper Wharfendale Fell rescue team at 2310 hours. By 0200 hours, 2 a.m. in the morning, they were trying to divert the stream. Now, keep in mind, nobody's heard anything from these divers, that they were trying to divert the stream, and they constructed a small dam.
Right.
They brought in water pumps. They had brought in a total of 12 pumps. The water flow was so great that 4 of their pumps had already broken down.
Wow.
Because they were working so hard. At this point, the rescue teams are like, the only hope we really have is that they managed to discover a pocket of air, a cabin with a pocket of air, and they could just hold out for a while. So at 1740 hours on Sunday, the 25th of June, it was reported that the first search party had found 5 bodies. That's almost all of them already. They were in a far part of a far Marathon West Passage. It was a short distance upstream of the junction they had mean to get to explore, the far Marathon East, which carries normally a small stream. At this point, being the insufferable mother that she is, Mother Nature decided to really let the waterworks go, and shit really took off. Rain increased. Dams started to fall, and water overflowed while the channel that had been dug for the diversion had to be extended another 6 feet vertically. I'm not talking about building it 6 feet in a direction. I'm talking it had to be 6 more feet high.
Wow, they must have had like a ton of equipment ready to go for this.
Well, once the rescue team was called in, they just started trucking stuff down there. I think this place was infamous, so they knew what they were in for. They knew this was going to be a slog. And by this point, there had previously been 2 search parties. A third search party, led by Brian Boardman, entered the cave at 2200 hours. Now, we're getting on to the next day here. We're more than 24 hours after they embarked. And they had instructions to search a number of minor side passages, opening off the near and far Marathon Passage. At 0310, on Wednesday morning, Boardman reported that whilst making an examination of the area in which the 3 bodies are found, he located a body of John Ogden. Now that I think that this is the last guy they're looking for. It was jammed vertically in an extremely tight rift, only 15 feet from the other 3. And the reason they didn't see it when they got the other ones, 1, the place is pitch black. 2, it was covered with silt. The only reason they saw him was his boots, socks, and laces, and part of his white helmet, where some of the silt had washed away, and you could see those colors now. Now, the author of the article I got a lot of this information from, Dr. Fincham, He's a Wessex member for years, and he's the president of the Leeds University of Speleological Society, chairman of Leeds area team of cave rescue organization, and a member of the Wessex Cave Club. Now, that was basically the end of these people. Since then, I do believe this cave has been closed up completely, and they won't allow further research into it. Ultimately, the goal was never accomplished. They never reached the end of it. They don't know what happens deeper into the cave. And still, people do try to break in, and people do try to go down there. They've been stopped, but there's always that human insatiability for just finding out what the hell's down there. We don't like the dark. We want to flush it out. We want to figure out what's down there. We want to map every twist and turn in the cave. If there's a single thing down there, we got to know about it, because you never know what you're going to find. What about the Mayan artifacts that were found in that cave? A different cave I was looking up, they found out that the Mayan artifacts had somehow gotten down there, and if you were to actually look into the old water system that one of the previous Mayan cities used, the cave connected to that water system. So that you get down into this cave, and you're finding all these remnants of people who are obscenely old. This stuff has never been touched by a human. The light has never been in this place since an inconceivable amount of time to your average person. And there's that fascination. I don't know. This first story I found interesting because all of these people, they knew exactly what they were getting into. They knew how utterly dangerous it was, and they did it anyway. And there's absolutely no payoff at the end.
That's the thing. They knew how dangerous it was when, and you mentioned that they sealed the cave up after this whole incident, and people were caught trying to break in.
Yeah, they went in too. 10 people dead. That's not enough.
It kind of makes you wonder if there's even more bodies down there now of the people who broke in and never got caught and never came out.
Yeah, that's probably true. And it's funny how when you rack up 10 bodies, that's still not enough to quash that human urge. I mean, anybody who can look at a cave like that, or an underwater cave, and not wonder and get that sudden urge to just take a step forward and go on in. Anybody who says they don't feel that, I maintain they're a liar. Oh. Everyone wants to do it. It's a human thing. The second case that interested me involved Norway, and it's a famous case. There's been stories written about it in the BBC and things like that. It's about some divers getting stuck in a dangerous cave system. It's in the Plordalen Valley in central Norway. It's a 35-meter wide river that rises abruptly out of the ground, and it basically rises out of the cave.
Is this the cave that's shaped like a big L, where it goes into the mountain real down and then it like comes up?
Yes, actually. That's essentially our cave we're talking about here. Now, if you dive into the pond and you swim underground for about half a kilometer, you emerge into a long, colorful cave. Now, the colorful cave is a good spot for people to take pictures and stuff like that. That seems to be a recurring theme with these caves. If these caves were creatures, I would almost consider them like a Venus flytrap, putting the nectar out there, try to get people in, and then, closing the jaws.
Right.
Hobbyists frequently climb out of the water there and admire the grotto, and then they return from where they came, the Plora. But if you're highly trained and experienced, and of course insatiably curious, you might go down the course, and that quickly plunges into a much deeper, narrow, and difficult, ice cold and pitch black cave. It's essentially called the sump. And after negotiating the sump, there's an underground pocket of water. You will then ascend into the cave. It's called I'm going to attempt a pronunciation of this. It's going to be terrible. The Steinennugelflaget.
That's pretty good.
Yeah, that's an interesting one. And at about 90 meters above the cave's vaulted ceiling lies the exit. It's a crack in the collapsed side of a hill. On February 6th in 2014, 5 divers wanted to explore the system, and they teamed up to go underground and go through the extent of the cave system. Now, the divers were all experienced in one way or another. The first man, Patrick Gronkvist, was the one of the trio who had originally discovered the passage between the caves. So he knew that these two connected because he previously swam this. There was another guy, Yari Usamaki. Oh, good Lord. Haltaranen. Haltarnan. We'll just call him Jari H. He was attempting this particular dive for the first time. Now, by accounts, again, we have a dive that's considered extremely dangerous in the sport. Like in a sport that's horrifically dangerous, this one is top tier dangerous. To give you an idea of the kind of conditions in this cave, if you have a single tear in your wetsuit, you're almost certainly going to die. The biggest danger, however, is hypercapnia, and it has a disorientating effect. It can keep you from knowing which way is up, which way is down. It causes extreme confusion because of what it does to your oxygen.
I heard that condition can make the diver feel almost as if they're drunk.
Yeah, precisely. And the reason it happens is because when you're doing cave diving, especially in confined spaces like this, they use rebreathers. I'm not sure how familiar you are with rebreathers. They're not like your standard scuba gear. They absorb carbon dioxide, and when you breathe out, that's absorbed. But the problem with a rebreather is it only works so well and only works so fast. So you have to regulate your breath very carefully. If you get panicked, when you get panicked, you start breathing extremely rapidly.
Yeah.
It overloads it. And then you just get more carbon dioxide going back into the lungs.
Wow.
Let's recap here. You got a rebreather on that relies on you breathing normally. And you're in a cave that's cold. It's pitch black, the color of a black marker on a paper. It's an enclosed space. And when I say enclosed, I mean enclosed. You'll see in a moment. It's very disorientating, the cave itself, regardless of the impact of the rebreather. If you're in any sort of physical distress, you're going to overload your rebreather. And then it doesn't take long.
Well, staying calm is the absolute name of the game.
Yeah, if you're not calm, you're dead. You are dead. They embark on this dive. The two who went first, the gentleman I mentioned, they're the ones who they decide to take the lead. They're the tip of the spear. And about an hour into the dive, shortly after the pair had swum through the deepest section, which is 110 meters lower than the cave entrance, Gronkvist looked back and he didn't see Mr. H, which I'm going to call him. He was originally behind him, but he looked back and didn't see him. He does a quick 180, and he travels back, and he finds his friend stuck in a narrow part of the cave. And narrow it was because there was barely enough room for a human being to fit through. And he was in absolute darkness, save for the lighting from the divers, from their flashlight/torches. They use the language torch because, you're...
And this was on the ascent on pretty much the home stretch where he got stuck, right?
Well, it was at the deepest part. You're not quite at the ascent. This is where your trip is switching over to the later half, but you're right at the beginning of the later half. He sees him. He's stuck in this super enclosed space, and he's panicking because he's stuck. I mean, he's really stuck. There are accounts that say that he was so firmly wedged in the rocks that it might have actually been impossible to get him out at that time. He was stuck in the rocks, and he also was stuck via a cord on his equipment. It was snagged, and he was signaling distress with his light. So Gronkvist decided to give him a cylinder of gas because he saw him panicking. He knew what was happening with that rebreather. So he gives him the cylinder of gas to reduce the amount of carbon dioxide in his system, get a fresh thing in there. And while he was replacing it, due to the panic, the diver started swallowing water. That's it. It's over. So Gronkvist watched him die. Now, considering where he died, there's now two new problems that are happening. His body is wedged in the cavern, blocking the three divers coming in behind them.
Yeah, and they're still a couple minutes behind yet, right?
And he's in there. I mean, he's in there firmly. They're not getting. It's going to be difficult to get him out. Gronkvist knew this immediately upon looking at him. He doubted his friends could remove the body and get past. Worse yet, it was far enough into the dive that turning back might not be possible. Because remember, you're on a timer with the rebreathers.
Yeah.
He spent a large amount of time trying to help his friend. Some estimates put it around like 15, 20 minutes. And just by nature of him being down there for that much longer, he added hours to his decompression time.
How much is it? It's every so many feet you have to stop for 30 minutes or something like that, right?
Yeah. And essentially, he's down there for an extended amount of time. So his decompression time went up and his filter is down. His descent now had to be slower. The first body, now he decides there's nothing I can do. I just got to go. So he went. he continued to their planned exit. The first diver to see the body was a Vesa Retanen, and he's a survivor here. He said when he saw the body, he decided to go forward, and he said that was a very good decision for him because he doesn't think he would have made it back. But it took him at least 15 minutes to get past the diver. It took him 15 minutes of struggling with that diver. Now, remember, you can't really put your back into it, too, because your rebreathers are like, I'm going to fail on you the moment you start breathing too heavy.
And then, plus, trying to maneuver a body out of a crevice like that, it's not like if you're on land where you can get a good foothold or try to leverage your body against the wall and like give it a real good pull. You're floating there in the water, so I imagine the mechanics of trying to get them out of there is far more difficult than a lot of people could imagine.
Well, yeah, you don't have an adequate like counterbalance to apply force. Not only that, but if you do try to like, I don't know, wedge your back up against a rock, God forbid you get a tear in your wetsuit, then you're dead.
Or damage your equipment.
Yeah, or damage the equipment. I mean, then you're equally as dead. I mean, who knows which one's faster? Probably the equipment, but the wetsuit tears, it's going to happen quick too. Remember where we are. We're in Norway. And they broke through ice with a chainsaw to get in here. He estimated that for the 15 minutes he spent trying to get past the diver, he increased his decompression by 3 hours. He eventually meets up with Gronkvist. He's got the same problem. They're going to have to ascend very slowly. Ultimately, the way this plays out is they actually end up coming to the surface 80 minutes early. 80 minutes early is not good. Soon afterwards, they both began to suffer the mild pains in their knees and elbows, decompression sickness, and it grew. In the following hours, it grew more and more. It was getting to be a real big deal.
Yeah, because that decompression sickness, I heard it primarily attacks the joints first.
Mm-hmm. There was actually cases of people having they're having fractures on their spine because of it. It gets pretty serious, and it doesn't need to be any kind of extreme case for it to really, really mess you up. So the diver behind him was named Yari Usamaki. I'm pronouncing that like it's Japanese, but I'm fairly sure this guy isn't Japanese. I'm not 100% though. But he was having his own problems. As soon as he saw the dead diver stuck in the rocks, he had panicked. And once he panicked, that's all it took with these rebreathers. As soon as he saw it, he started panicking. And that was the end of that. Now, the final diver, Kyle Kakinen, he tried to come to Usamaki's aid, but it was no use. He actually made the alternate decision than the other guys. He didn't want to try to get past the diver. He didn't want to do any of that. He turned right around, and he yeeted right out there. He got out the way he came. Well, he came out 11 hours after they had started the dive. It was supposed to be a 5-hour dive. He's 6 hours over the time. All 3 of the survivors had emerged faster than it was safe. All 3 were suffering from the bends. This was all because not properly decompressing. And considering the time scale, an extra 3 hours of decompression, went up and early, did half of that. Extreme physical problems. One fella is pretty much off the entire diving thing just because he can't physically handle it, at least until he recovers some.
I got a question about that. So they're out there cave diving, and it's so deep that they need to go through the whole decompression ascent. Yeah. So if they get out and they have the bends and they need to be repressurized and brought down correctly, I imagine going to a facility in Miami, for example, would probably have a decompression chamber.
Probably, yeah.
Because it's right there on the shore.
Yeah, it's coastal.
Popular spot for scuba divers. But this is inland Norway in a cave system.
Yeah. There's 3 letters that come to mind. It's SOL. I mean, they eventually got help. They were taken to a hospital. From everything I was able to read, they pretty much just had to suffer from the bends for a while. And I can't imagine that was anything but absolutely brutal.
Yeah.
It's probably one of the worst pains on the planet, I'd imagine. So what ultimately ended up happening, the 2 people died in the cave. The one fellow still was wedged down there. And the one guy was never really going to dive again because of the bends. Not again, but at least anytime soon because he suffered the bends so badly. And the other 2 were determined to go back and get the folks that were still stuck down there.
Didn't they do that against orders?
Yes, they did. They actually broke into it. Now, the reports said the local officials were kind of proud of them for going back and taking care of it. And they said, we're going to have to investigate investigate you, blah, blah, blah. But nothing ever really came of it. Because, I mean, like, they already had 2 people that died down there. They figured, I mean, if this had happened somewhere like New York, they would have filed some bullshit charge against them.
Yeah.
But with Norway, it's a little more close-knit there. They ended up getting the body on the return trip, but it took 101 diving hours.
Wow.
That's how deep and how crazy this cave system was. Every single survivor has said they're going to continue to cave dive.
Man.
Just to recap, these guys dived into this cave because they wanted to go through this cave system. They wanted to see it. They wanted to experience it. They felt the draw of that pitch, that inky blackness, and the coldness in this unknown alien place, inhospitable to human life. And they can't wait to get back.
It's got to be like being in an alien world, being in a cave, pitch dark, and knowing that you can't just turn around and go back home. You can't just call it a day, call the ranger to come find you and get a ride. Like, you're screwed. You are cut off from the outside world completely.
I have a theory about it too. I was actually thinking about this a lot a couple of nights ago, and I was thinking about the motivation for doing these kind of things. Do you remember what it was like when you were little and you didn't know how a lot of things worked?
Mm-hmm.
But the world was just full of magic. The whole world was just magic.
All magic.
I mean, well, you knew that, like, there were reasonable explanations and mechanics behind the way everything worked, but it was all unknown. It was fantastic. It was captivating. When we get older, it's gone. You find out how everything works. You find out how, cargo fast room because combustion, because of this, because of that. You may even know how to build an engine when you get older. It's like all the mystery and the wonder of life disappears. And I suspect that for them, even though this was a previously explored cave, they stepped on an alien planet. You know what I mean?
In a way, yeah.
If someone told you that you could go into a cave and at the end of that cave, you would find El Dorado, you would not be able to keep any of the gold, but you would see the city. You would see that ancient civilization, but you only had a 5% chance of surviving. Would you do it?
I wouldn't, but I'm sure there's a lot of people that would.
You're talking to one. I would do it.
Really?
Yeah, I would do it. And, I'm trying to pinpoint what exactly that is. And I think it's just that human thing to explore the unknown. It's fascinating. It's interesting. It's almost like magic down there, man. I think that's what these cave divers, I'm guessing, but I think that's what they feel every time they go, even if it's something they've been to before.
It has got to be an intense adrenaline rush. Probably lasts a good while, especially when they emerge from the cave, essentially victorious.
Yeah, that adrenaline rush. And I guarantee you that it's addiction for me. Man, heroin's got nothing on adrenaline. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
Yeah, I found these 2 cases very, very interesting. And, the more interesting the ones where tragedy strikes. But nevertheless, I wanted to do something a little bit different this time, too, because, just like Bigfoot banging housewives isn't really fun too much. Because essentially the housewife is just a lunatic, and she probably should have gotten a cat instead of writing a book.
Well, that's pretty good.
Yeah, these were really, really cool cases. And actually, if I was a younger man and I had the proper training, I think it's something I would probably do.
I wouldn't.
Probably. Where's your sense of adventure? But I found these 2 cases very, very interesting. And I found it very interesting that in the second case, at least where there were survivors, the survivors are going back. And they've already said, we're going back. So,
well, if it happened in 2014, they probably have been back already.
Probably. I haven't seen any kind of and I've looked to see if there's any follow-up on that. They might very well have been back and it just hasn't been reported because, the news is all blood and guts, so no one dies, I'm not interested.
Yeah.
But I know they've done some other things.
Well, that's pretty good.
Yeah, diving's risky business, dog. Risky business.
Guess we could wrap it up.
All right.
Oh, okay. I remember how to do an outro now. All right, that's it for this episode of Bell Midnight. Next episode, we'll be exploring voodoo magic and voodoo death.
Oh, good Lord.
Until then.
Goodbye.